Dangerous valuation myths and the real truth. That's the topic today. So I come across some things in my line of work that might be believed in your industry, might be believed by people that are advising you, and I want to throw some cold water on some of those beliefs, those myths, as I call them, based on things that I have seen and things that I have proven out to be true over time. The first one I'm going to talk about is bigger is better is a myth. It is a belief out there a lot of times. More sales, more trucks, more people, more locations. That must mean a bigger value, right? And sometimes that is definitely not the case. And the reason why typically is because that does not necessarily translate into more cash for the business. Sometimes it means they're on a big growth streak, and sometimes ultimately that will prove to be the case that over time they will become a more valuable company. But sometimes it just means more debt and ultimately a lower value. So that's something to keep in mind, that just because that top line is high does not mean it's actually going to be worth more than a business sometimes half or even a quarter its size, believe it or not. So the math doesn't work that way. Ultimately, what we're looking for is cash flows and risk. Lower risk, higher cash flows, higher value. So that's what I would encourage you to pay attention to when you're trying to drive value into your business. Jumping off that, rules of thumb work. That's another myth out there. I can't tell you how many times I've sat down with a business owner or someone that's counseling someone and say, well, this is what we use. This is our rule of thumb. And I would be not a good advisor if I didn't look at the rules of thumb. It's important to look at them, see if they work. I find oftentimes they don't work, and for a couple of reasons. One, if the rule of thumb that came about for the beginning of time in your industry, if it ever worked, it worked for that business, and unless your business is like that business, it won't work again. And that's what I often find to be the case, is that every time I pick up a valuation of a company, there are a few things that are completely different than anything I've seen before. Everyone is different. So if you apply a rule of thumb, and a common one is sales. So sales times a multiple, whatever that is, 0.5 or 0.2 or whatever, and that's your value. Using the example from previous, we know that not to be true because sometimes that definitely does not translate into cash to the bottom line. So that rule of thumb won't work. And finally, owner's compensation is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. But one thing that I see commonly is that people will cherry pick the owner compensation, add it back, and say, this times a multiple is the value. As I mentioned to a colleague the other day, the problem is, unless you're going to live on beans and rice as the buyer, that ultimately won't work, because you have to pay the seller back with the cash flows the business generates. So we can't just throw those back into the value, because you have to take a salary to live and to take care of your family and do those things you need to do. Okay? So be careful with these valuation myths. They can be dangerous. You need to understand them and understand why a lot of times they're not true. This is Josh Horn of Horn Valuation. Have a great day. Bye.